Hi, my name is Lisa Richner, and I'm doing my presentation on the effects of solitary confinement on prisoners' mental health. I went to tour Pelican Bay Prison last year and was really affected by the way solitary confinement had been used in the past. I was able to sit in the cell and see exactly what small area they were in during the time that they were in solitary confinement. I wanted to know what the negative effects were on inmates who were in solitary confinement, and after doing all my research, I learned a lot more than I was aware of prior to researching everything. My primary research questions were: what mental health effects occurred when someone was in solitary confinement? How long are inmates in solitary confinement? And what happens when an inmate who already has mental health issues prior to being put in solitary confinement? I wanted to know exactly the mental health effects that each prisoner dealt with, whether they already had mental health issues prior to this, from whenever they were younger, or from their life experiences, or if being put into solitary confinement ended up affecting their mental health even more. The mental health effects on inmates range from each person, but most inmates who are put in solitary confinement for more than 10 days will result in harmful cognitive, social, and physical effects. This can be anywhere from having issues with social contact. They end up withdrawing from others, not wanting to be around other people when they have interaction, and then they end up having social withdrawal from others once they are released from solitary confinement. Even if an inmate does not have a history of mental illness, when they're in solitary confinement, this can cause extreme mental and emotional distress, which then can lead to a diagnosable mental illness. So say you went into solitary confinement with no prior mental illness, such as depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, any of those, and then once you were in solitary confinement for multiple years or even more than 10 days, then you would end up being able to have a diagnosable mental illness such as depression, anxiety, and any of those. The other mental health effects on inmates are that they can cause stress-related reactions such as a decreased appetite and emotional breakdown, sleep disturbances, aggression and rage, mood swings, increased suicide tendencies, and paranoia. And being in solitary confinement for an extended amount of time can even cause an inmate to commit suicide. So imagine already having major sleep disturbances while you're at home, and then you end up going into prison and having to be around multiple people that you know nothing about, and then also after that being put in a small cell that has nobody with you, and you don't know when you're going to get out, and your brain just won't shut off, and you're just completely unaware of what your brain is doing because you're not able to sleep. And then a lot of prisoners also already deal with aggression and rage, and so the solitary confinement ends up increasing the aggression and rage and their mood swings, and then they end up having to deal with that once they are either released from prison or released from solitary confinement. The time that prisoners spend in solitary confinement, in 2015, around 80,000 prisoners were kept in solitary confinement in the United States. And they are alone in a small space which can be up to 24 hours a day. Some prisons allow you to be out for 1 hour a day for exercise and showering, and some only allow that 3 to 4 times a week. It just depends on the prison. Some inmates have even been in solitary confinement for more than 40 years, which seems completely inhumane to me. And solitary confinement can range from being locked up and dressed in security clothing with no entertainment, or in an area with their material possessions. It just completely depends on the prison and what exactly their process is for the solitary confinement. Inmates who already have existing mental health issues and then are placed in solitary confinement become severely and chronically disturbed and dysfunctional. According to Coopers, solitary confinement causes serious symptoms and disabilities in prisoners who are relatively stable emotionally, but in prisoners who are prone to mental illness or have a history of mental illness, the isolation greatly exacerbates whatever disorder they are inclined to offer. So obviously, if you already have a mental illness and then you're in solitary confinement, you're not getting the mental health that you need, and you're also being pretty much locked away from anyone else that can even have social interaction with you. It just makes them have even increasing mental illness. The mentally ill have an elevated risk of solitary confinement, and the greater use of solitary confinement occurs in facilities that report a higher percentage of prisoners with mental health needs. Inmates who already have mental illness prior to isolation can have increasing mental illnesses due to the solitary confinement. Then I got this statistic from Steinbeck that says about 1/5 to 2/3 of prisoners held in solitary confinement have a serious mental illness which is diagnosed or manifested before isolation. So before they were even in the solitary confinement, these prisoners have serious mental illnesses which have been diagnosed and more than likely are not being treated when they're at prison to begin with. And then they get put away into isolation, and it just increases the symptoms of their mental illness. Here's a picture of solitary confinement. So these look like a couple of shelves to put their personal belongings. Here's the bed with the flat cot and the pillow. The toilet's right next to their head. And then there's the sink, and you can see there's 3 walls with absolutely no window and just no hope for anything in that area. My recommendations are prisons should no longer offer solitary confinement as a punishment for inmates. They should be able to practice different punishment areas and different locations for prisoners who need more of a lockdown time due to either their crime or how they are in prison, but I feel like solitary confinement should no longer be used in any prison across America. And this has been proven over and over again as a more harmful practice than a helpful one for inmates. And in conclusion, the mental health of inmates needs to be thought of, and we need to abolish solitary confinement in all prisons across the country.